Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And I'm here today with two special guests to talk about the England versus India game at the World Cup at Edgbaston. England won the game rather comfortably in the end, but it was a pretty tight game throughout. And to talk about it, we have Daniel Norcross, who goes at Norcross Cricket on Twitter. He's a radio commentator for Test Match Special. Hi, Dan.
Hello there.
Hi. And we also have Kartikeya Date, who is at Cricketing View on Twitter. He's a cricket writer for multiple outlets, including ESPN Cricinfo and The Hindu. Hi, Kartikeya.
Hi. How are you?
Good. So let's start with Daniel. Bit of impressions of the game and how cricket in England is not dead yet, right?
Well, that's really what the game was all about, isn't it? It was absolutely ludicrous. A rational human being watching that game would have assumed that after watching Jason Roy and Johnny Bairstow put on 161, I think it was, for the first wicket, that in so doing, they'd effectively won the game. I mean, it was not an easy pitch to bat on. We saw quite early on there's a little bit of unusual bounce from Mohammad Shami and Bumrah from one particular end. The ball was misbehaving. And any sane, intelligent human being would have said, well, that 161 has won the game. But of course, England is in a state of fervid terror and anxiety at the moment because for multiple reasons, the one-day international team has been built up partly on the basis of data, facts, winning games and being surprisingly good for English fans. Another reason is because cricket in England is in a very peculiar place where there's a World Cup taking place in its own country, and yet it's got a tenth of the viewing population of the English women's football team, which is to say nothing disrespectful to the England women's football team, but it's not certainly how it would have been within 5-10 years ago. And so there's a sort of that anxiety feeds a failure really of cognition and understanding of what's going on. So I was surrounded by a bunch of experts. We watched the game unfold, and really it wasn't until the last sort of 6-7 overs when MS Dhoni and Kedajala just sort of let the game drift into oblivion that England fans could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Now, whether that's a good thing for cricket, it's a very good thing for English cricket. It's very important for some people in the tournament that this happened. But it was a very bizarre and unusual day in so many ways. I mean, we saw some extraordinary moments. We saw yet again Ravindra Jadeja arrive on the field of play within a couple of overs and then just field for the rest of the match. Don't quite know how that happens. Take a really important catch. We saw Jason Roy reciprocate by coming in with a hamstring injury and then not really bothering to field so that James Vince could take a couple of catches. There is many things to talk about, Sid, but my general impressions of it were that it was a fervid and bizarre, fever-filled day that probably has helped the tournament in a way. It won't have helped Pakistan fans, it won't have helped Bangladesh fans, but I think if you could say that good has come out of a result of the game of cricket, it probably has just.
Talking about a relief, the 3 games that England have lost in this tournament have been when they were chasing. So were you a bit relieved when they won the toss and elected to bat on what turned out to be a really good pitch after all the discussions about not getting the pitches they wanted?
Yes, I mean, what I was interested by really is that England have a habit of taking a view and then sticking to it. And part of this was, again, built up by data. That I think they'd had 17 consecutive successful run chases in England. But they'd failed really to understand the other part of the data, which is that they were in bilateral series and they were on very, very flat decks. It was a good pitch, but it wasn't an absolute run fest. And I think, what they'd taken into account finally was their own anxiety and their own terror of playing within a World Cup. And chasing is just really hard. I mean, one of the most extraordinary statistics was given to me by Andy Zaltzman today on commentary that I say it's extraordinary, maybe it isn't, but only 2 teams have ever won a one-day international needing over 100 runs with 10 overs to go. And that sort of surprised me, I think partly because I'd lazily assumed that 100 off 10 overs was perfectly doable, but it's very much doable when you bat first. It's very much, it turns out, not doable when you bat second. So I was interested to see that England change their approach because they tend to be ones for sticklers. They don't like to go back on a plan because it sort of implies weakness. And they sort of did today, and it worked for them.
Yeah, I think the 100 of 10 overs, I think we've spoiled a lot by T20 and the IPL when we see things like that being pulled off on a regular basis. But I was a bit surprised too. But then it struck me that when you play a game of 100 overs and then you're down to the last 10, the pitch is obviously worn out and the bowlers and the best bowlers are on in the last 10 and you're probably lost 4 or 5 wickets anyway by then. So it can't
Well,
be.
you see, well, Sid, what you're talking there is that's what I mean about the rationality. You see, that's rationality comes in, but post facto, in the midst of the maelstrom of a game, that suddenly, look, I've got to be really clear on this. TMS said at the start of the game, I think Jonathan Agnew had said right in his opening salvo was, this is the most important game of white ball cricket that England have played since the World Cup final in 1992, or it very well could be, which is one heck of a statement to make when you think about all the games that have been played in between. But, I think he was kind of right. And what I guess we were looking to see from England was how would they respond to that pressure? And we sort of didn't respond awfully well because we thought, 100 to win off 10 overs, India are going to make it. Suddenly, all of rationality just went flying out of the window. It was a glorious experience to watch in one way.
So let me bring Kartikeya into this. So, talking about rationality, do you agree with what Daniel was saying, that by the time Roy and Bairstow had put on that partnership, the game was pretty much well into England's territory?
Broadly, yes. I mean, I think basically they made 180 in the first 25 overs of the game. And in no subsequent 25-over period did any team approach anything like that. But I think it's worth sort of pointing out, what was different about this game compared to a lot of the other games that you see. So games involving Sri Lanka or Afghanistan or one of those, or even IPL games and stuff. Normally in these games, you get the sufficient number of bad balls. Like there's always a square cut available somewhere, or someone drifts on the pads and you get a 4 to fine leg, or you get half volleys. You get something like that, and usually that's why the sort of the top level batsman stands out in a lot of these IPL type games where they're just too good. They put those away. But in this game, the bowling on both sides was quite good. And I think what was probably different for the two sides, I think, was something Daniel alluded to, which was that it was far more consequential to England than it was to India, as far as the tournament is concerned. And so I think, especially with Roy and Bairstow, they took a lot of chances in the first 25 overs of the game. They repeatedly took on the fielder on the boundary and cleared the fielder on the boundary. Especially Jason Roy, I mean, he would leave his stumps and hit on the rise through cover, often against the spin when he was playing against Yadav. And it was coming off. And it kept coming off. And by the time one of them got out finally, they had enough, I think. Because it was not a wicket on which you could sort of, kick through the line and on the rise. I think there was a statistic in the second innings where India was comfortably scoring at a run of balls from the full and the short balls, but they were going at like 2.5 or 3 against the good length. And these are not bad players. I mean, this is what Virat Kohli and Rohit Sharma. And they're not able to hit on the rise. They're not able to get any timing. And so, I mean, this was a game which was decided not at a not at the quotidian level of your average limited overs game. I think this was a game where the standard of bowling on both sides was very, very disciplined and very, very well planned. Both, bowling and field setting, that combination was very, very well organized for all 50 overs. It was not as though there was a weak bowler anywhere. Uh, but to their credit, Roy and Bairstow, you know, decided to take chances and it came off. And they got so far ahead that, so from then on, India were basically chasing the game and were always falling behind.
Okay, so let's talk about one of the batsmen that you spoke about there. I'll get Daniel into this. Daniel, last year in Sri Lanka, Johnny Bairstow got 100, and then he pointed to the press box, and then he went on to say he was proud as punch after being castigated, and then everyone was wondering who had castigated him exactly. And then, of course, this week he said something similar. Of course, this was pointed towards couple of former England cricketers. And then, of course, he goes on to make 100. And people said, again, Johnny Bairstow conquers his imaginary villains. Do you agree? And what did you make of that innings?
Yes, it's absolutely ludicrous and preposterous, really, to imagine that in a country like England, which is desperate, absolutely desperate, its journalists and broadcasters for the team to do well, that it would wish ill of the team. I know there's a stereotype about journalists, and especially in England, how much they prefer a side to do badly, so that it makes copy easier and you can generate clicks and you can be angry. But actually, the sort of general feeling in England at the moment is the exact opposite. If anything, it's gone too far the other way. There's a sort of almost a sense of desperation that the England cricket team needs to save England from its own failure to appreciate cricket. But for Johnny Bairstow, it seems to be a necessary driver. And I don't really know how I feel about that. On one level, I feel I could be offended. I'm not a naturally offended man, so I could be offended on behalf of all the other journalists. On the other hand, it could be that because Johnny Bairstow feels the need to do this, and when he does it, he seems to score 100 straight after it. It's not a bad thing, really. We basically become human piñatas. He accuses the press and various broadcasters of being out to get them, and then he goes out and performs better, and that sort of works into our hands in a way. As for whether that was what drove him on today, I don't know, because he didn't really go for the full loaded, pointed back wave at the journalist to do today. I think he sort of realised that he'd maybe gone a little bit, or I'd been misquoted. I don't know. There's that as well. He could have been slightly misquoted or slightly badly treated in the way it was reported, but he didn't make a big deal about how the reporters had reported him. I was on commentary with Graham Swan, and we were talking about the way Bairstow batted when Roy was there, and it was very different. It was far more fluent. He was encouraged, I think, by the situation to take risks. It's quite an odd thing, isn't it? Joe Root came in when Roy was brilliantly caught, and suddenly Bairstow became becalmed. His innings sort of squeezed in on itself. It sort of turned into a tiny singularity of nothingness, and his get-out shot was completely predictable. Where England have struggled a bit, I think, is that with Roy's injury, not having Alex Hales, because they've taken a stance, or a moral stance, by deciding not to pick him. I don't know whether that's the case, but Hales was a ready-made replacement for either of those two opening batsmen. Him going, Vince is not remotely a like-for-like replacement, and England have looked very different without Roy at the top of the order. Roy in there sort of almost made Bairstow's innings, I think. How much of that was because Bairstow was inflamed with passionate rage against the likes of Michael Vaughan and KP, or how much he actually felt more comfortable in the surroundings of Jason Roy, who was, I would say, pretty much the only batsman today to take the sort of ludicrous and insane risks that he probably needed to score regularly at over 6 and over. It wasn't as easy a pitch, I think, as people made out. there was stuff going on there. And the way Roy attacked Chahal particularly and Kuldeep Yadav was really what changed the game for me. Actually, England ought to stick to plan A. The idea that they should try and develop other plans actually has been to their disbenefit. Against Sri Lanka, they looked like they thought, well, I've got to get to 233. We're going to do this in a sensible, ordered way. Really, they've got one way of playing, play in that one way, and just do it. And today they sort of did do that with the bat, and it was to their benefit, I think.
Yeah, so let me bring in Kartikeya here, talking about one of your favorite topics, which is risks and how the batsmen go about things. I mean, can you talk a bit about Jason Roy, as well as Bairstow and Stokes, the kind of risks they had to take to actually score so fast and score and get the better of India's spinners? I mean, at the end of the game, Virat Kohli spoke about the short boundary, and he said how it's very difficult for the spinners to bowl when the batsmen are constantly targeting that. Of course, you can say it was the same boundary for both teams, and India could also have targeted that. But the point being that the English batsmen did venture quite a few risks, right?
Yeah, but I think Daniel's point is a good one, because I think Roy is sort of naturally inclined to play that way. I mean, I've never seen him play like a percentage innings. He's like Sehwag. And he's actually, I think, the closest thing I've seen since Sehwag to Sehwag. I mean, he has the same tendency to play beside the line of the ball from time to time. He has the same tendency to play inside out a little bit. He has the same tendency to aim at mid wicket against the spinners, whether it's with the spin or against the spin. He's not afraid to hit across the line from the stumps. And then, of course, as it is with all England batsmen, he has, cultivated a reverse sweep and a paddle and all those things. It's not just that they decided to do this today. I mean, this is a method which they've cultivated over 4 years. I mean, England played 35 fall shots in the first 22 overs of their innings. Now, you could say they're lucky, but it's one thing to get away with 35 fall shots, which will happen from time to time. It's another to do that and keep taking risks and keep playing your game. And that's an amazing sort of, that's a cultivated skill. I don't think anybody can just do that. Like, you're playing one way for 6 months and then, you play another way for 6 months. I don't think it works that way, And as far as even with Bairstow, I think there was clearly an element of, there was I'm going to show them, there seemed to be that element. And hey, if that works for him, fine. I mean, Virat Kohli gets accused of these things. Not now, of course. Now he's the sort of the unimpeachable elder statesman, But if you remember, right, most of the 2010s, Virat Kohli has been accused of all sorts of things. Like,
Sure. Yeah.
He's arrogant, he's this, he's that. But the point is, it works for Virat Kohli. He plays better when he does that. It doesn't get in his way. So people are different.
Hey, on that point, Kartikeya, do you think that the sort of remorseless way in which Kohli used to score his hundreds, and the idea that he would get half century after half century after half century and not convert them into hundreds, has perhaps the way he's been in this World Cup, which is quite keen to, I don't want to go so far as to say virtue signal, but he's not been the Kohli that you've described of the relatively recent past, has he? Don't boo Steve Smith, walk when you've not got an edge, all that kind of stuff. I wonder, has that in any way translated into the ruthlessness in his batting? Because when he got out today to a very un-Kohli-like shot, it came as an enormous surprise to the crowd. I mean, the crowd, which was sort of 75% Indian supporting, but also an enormous relief to the English crowd, didn't see that shot coming from anywhere. I wonder if he's lost a little bit of edge somehow. Is that heretical to say?
I don't know if it's heretical to say, but I don't know that it's necessarily true. I think one of the things that's happened, which is sort of very strange for an Indian team, is that India are basically playing with three batsmen. And now with Dhawan out, they're playing with basically two really good batsmen. And, then there's KL Rahul, who's sort of makeshift. He sort of fits in wherever there's a spot. And then the others are all power hitters. I mean, Dhoni is not the player he used to be. And I think that has sort of affected the way he plays. I think he attacks less nowadays, but that's probably because he feels he has to hold an end up for much longer. And I don't know, you may be right. That may be sort of creating sort of errors where there may not have been errors before. But I mean, you may well be right. I mean, the elder statesman thing is, I often wonder as to what extent these players actually inhabit these characters that are created for them.
Well, indeed, yes.
Especially with pitches being what they are, it sort of affects the way the Indian team design works out, right? Because it puts in, for the first time really in their senior international careers, it puts tremendous onus on Kohli and Rohit Sharma to sort of be the engine of the batting. This is what...
And we saw that, didn't we? I mean, we absolutely saw that today, that partnership was so key. And it was so key. Everybody knew it was key, You knew that Punt was coming in at 4, and you looked at the rest of the batting lineup and you sort of sensed that they were not really going to be able to cope with the rate getting up to 10, 11 and over. But you sort of thought that Sharma and Kohli could.
So one point that I must bring up before we run out of time, and a point that whole of India has been melting down over, is the last 10 overs.
Oh, yes.
India needed more than 100 runs. You were at the ground. Tell me a bit about how it was when Hardik Pandya was batting. Pandya and Pant, they had a good partnership going. And then also go on to describe what it was when Dhoni and Jadhav basically just said, hey, we're going to take some singles.
Do you know, it's really, really difficult to be rational in this situation because the game unfolds before your eyes. And so it becomes partly teleological, doesn't it? You sort of think, well, is it because the ball was bowled like this? They bowled better and it made it harder. What was, when Pandya was batting, it was scary for England fans. There was an over that Wokes bowled, and Wokes, bear in mind, he bowled 3 maidens at the top of the innings, and the first England bowler to do that for the best part of 15 years. And suddenly, Pandya whacks him for 3 4s and 2 2s. The 2 2s, by the way, could easily have been 4s, were it not for quite terrific outfielding. I mean, England fielded brilliantly today for the very most part. And you sort of thought, oh my God, Pandya can win this game on his own. His vision was extraordinary. Wherever, I mean, there was an over from Wokes. That over from Wokes lasted about 7 minutes as Morgan chatted to Wokes and back about precise placement of each fielder. Pandya was spectacular. Every time the field was moved, he found a different gap. And you thought, oh my God, this man can do anything. He got out because, you can get out. And suddenly, Dhoni with Jadhav was an entirely different proposition. Now, obviously, we're looking at this, and we found it curious beyond belief as the rate moved from 10 to 11 to 12 and then rapidly to 14 and 15. What was most bizarre was, I guess, Dhoni's attitude, intent. We kept thinking, is he going to try and take it so deep that 14 and over, 15 and over, is this the T20 experience? We saw in the last over just what he could do. Before that, nothing at all. Nothing against Jadhav here, because I'm not sure that he was able to find his timing on that pitch. It was quite a grabby, quite an unusual pitch. But Dhoni, his choices were extraordinary. The game petered out into nothingness. Look, Dhoni did this similarly at Lord's last year. I've sort of stopped trying to interpret what Dhoni does and why he does it, because you get into rather shady territory if you sort of really express the alternative reason for what's going on. And I don't think that is what's going on. I just think that maybe he couldn't find his timing. Maybe England's bowlers bowled better. It was sort of baffling to watch. I mean, what was your view? You see it on TV. In many ways, you get a better view of it on TV.
Yeah, let me tell you my view, which is probably the majority view here, before I get in Kartikeya, because I know his view, which is probably more in the minority view. But my view is that we've seen Dhoni do this before, not only at Lord's, but also famously in the World Cup semi-final in 2015, when India were chasing a big score against Australia. And, but of course, the chances were very slim by the time. But Dhoni has done this shutting of shop. It's not really improvising or trying anything different. And the baffling bit is that we've also seen the opposite in the IPL, which is that even though the run rate is 10 and over, 12 and over, I know it's a totally different format and different kinds of bowlers, but he does go after them. He does make sure that he clinically gets his team close, or he goes after them and gets out. So he does one of the two. So the only reason I can think of that he might have done this is maybe if things get close, if there is rain, if India lose another game, and then it comes down to net run rate, maybe this can help. But of course, you can't say the same about a World Cup semi-final in 2015 when net run rates don't matter. And the same at Lord's when, again, net run rates don't really matter. So I think the disappointment and the baffling aspect is that the lack of going for it. When people would rather see him try and hit out and get out rather than just trying to play the way he does. So Kartikeya, what is your take on this?
I think one of the things that's happened is that everybody knows everybody's game so well now that, teams know where Dhoni scores his runs and where he plays his big hits. And, with the ball not coming onto the bat, basically Dhoni doesn't have he can't back away to leg and hit square on the offside or, hit above over cover on the rise, unless the ball is really coming onto the bat. So those shots are basically not on. And the leg side shots were on. And so basically the one option Dhoni had was to take on the fielder on the boundary and try and clear the fielder on the boundary. Now, the question is, do you do that when you're still 70 runs away or whatever, 60 runs away, given that you have basically 4 number 11s to come? And, you're going to enter into you're getting to the end of the league where, whether you finish second or whether you finish fourth could be decided on run rate. I understand sort of the basic idea that, you have to at least be seen to be going for it, but yeah. I think there's a little bit of, there's more to it than that. I don't think he cares to be seen to be going for it. For example, just in the last game against West Indies, he played this extremely conservative, calculated innings when India were batting first. I think at one point he had like 20 in 48 balls or something like that. And but then it came good because by the end he was more or less at a run a ball. I mean, it's actually not that dissimilar to the way Rohit Sharma played or even Kohli played.
But at this stage of the match, there was no real reason for it. I mean, unless what he'd done is decided that, well, the game had gone, and so he was going to be there, and he was going to bat, and he was going to score those runs. And I take the point that England did know how to bowl at him, and they bowled pretty well at him. Actually, they bowled slower ball, short balls into a packed left leg side field on a pitch that was a bit grabby and it was a bit tricky. And I get all that, but I think that once Pandya went, the watching crowd still thought, well, what's the point in Dhoni if he doesn't now do something? What is he doing for the team if he doesn't come in at number 6 and be that batsman? What would, it's a little bit like, what would Jesus Christ do? What would Butler do in this situation? Well, he'd give it a good go, wouldn't he?
Right, but Dhoni's 37, 38 now. He's coming to the end of his career. He's not the player he used to be. There are things he used to be able to do which he can't do now. That this is fairly clear. There's a school of rage on Twitter which holds that he should no longer be in the 11, and that Rishabh Pant, Rishabh Pant's rightful place is being occupied by this old man with grey hair who should no longer be playing, and so on. There's never an obvious answer to, do you just discard someone like Dhoni just because he's not the player he used to be? Or do you sort of hold on to him because he has so much experience, and that any circumstance in any game which comes up now, he's probably seen before in his life, and that's probably very useful.
I entirely agree with you on that. I think that the value of Dhoni to the Indian team is not in the runs he scores and the way he bats. I think that he's actually the de facto on-field captain. Kohli is the off-field captain, but Dhoni is the on-field captain. And you need, if you could find one person that can do both roles, that's terrific. I'm not sure that Kohli can necessarily do the on-field captain role particularly well. And I think Dhoni does it much better. And so I take that point absolutely. I think you're spot on that. The problem is that if you do that, but Dhoni's also your number 6, then you get into the situation, as we talked about earlier, where India bat essentially for Rohit and Kohli. And after that, there's a fear that they don't really have a batting lineup.
The question India need to ask is, how are they going to use him when the target becomes 300 plus or 320 plus? I would think that the one way to go about it is to send him in early, send him in at maybe even number 3 and say, hey, go for it. And if whatever runs you score is whatever runs he scores is like the bonus. And then you then work around your batting order using maybe like a Dinesh Karthik or somebody else who can play that role that Dhoni does now. Later on, and Dinesh Karthik can even play the big shots, as we've seen.
3 might be pushing it because you don't want to take Kohli out of 3, but 4, the wicket falls there, give him a chance to get in, because he's one of those players who is quite definitely more likely to kick on. He can get 25 and 40. You can see him getting 70 and 60. Not quite so sure in a situation like this that it was definitely not tailor-made. It was the exact opposite of tailor-made for him today. It was precisely the point. I think when England saw Dhoni coming out to bat, bizarrely, you might think, they went, hooray, Dhoni. He's going to chew up some balls, and that's going to make life easier for us.
Yeah, but India not built this 11 to play 330 games.
True, yes.
And I don't think moving Dhoni up and down in this 11 anywhere is going to make a big difference in those games. Because if this Indian 11 gives up 330 or 340, it means that the bowling has had a bad time and they're behind in the game. Like, they're really badly behind in the game. If India want to play that kind of game, then they have to pack the batting, and they have to basically, Pandya and all these people have to play like a position or 2 below what they're playing right now. But they're not doing that. And they want to play in this way. Just as England have to play the way that they have prepared themselves to play for such a long time now, 4 years nearly. India have to play the way they know.
Okay, let's just wrap up with Daniel, thoughts on the game against New Zealand, because England still haven't qualified for the semi-final, of course. And that's another big game coming up. After the high of this one, they get into a tough game against New Zealand now.
It's absolutely enormous. New Zealand, I think, have had a bit of a charmed World Cup. They started, their schedule worked beautifully for them, and they've actually won quite a few tight, close games against opposition that they ought to have beaten far better than that. As Kartikeya said earlier, that they're sort of existing with a couple of batsmen and no more, and they've been a bit fortunate. That doesn't mean to say for 1 minute that when England find themselves in what will feel like a must-win game, because they know that Pakistan played Bangladesh in the last game at Lords and will expect Pakistan to win. That might not be a wise expectation, but it's going to be one they have to take on board. They're going to need to beat New Zealand in their minds, and when that happens, it'll be the same panic and anxiety as we've had today.
And Kartikeya, a bit about India. They have games against Bangladesh and Sri Lanka now, games that you would expect this Indian team to win, though you can't rule out an upset. But you would think that they would be looking. I mean, we have one eye on the semi-final now.
Well, I mean, they've had a very good World Cup. I mean, if you had given them at the beginning of the World Cup, given their schedule of games, if you had given them 5 wins and 1 loss in their first 6 games, first 7 games, I think they would have taken it. I think to some extent this happened today, and I think it will definitely happen in the Bangladesh game, where Bangladesh have a lot more to play for than India in that game, just as England had a lot more to play for today than India did, as far as position and security in the table is concerned. It might push someone to do something outstanding or unusual, like it pushed Bairstow to, just go hell for leather today. They could use it, to experiment with all the questions that have come up today. I don't think they know the answer to who their number 4 batsman is, which, you might think that, 7 games into the World Cup is not a good place to be. But, they have really one option there, Dinesh Karthik, and that's not an obvious choice in any event. One thing they may consider is that if they're not going to use Kedar Jadhav's bowling, then is there any point to playing him? So they have a lot of sort of batting order questions to resolve. And I don't know if they are actually inclined to take those questions on. I think they are inclined to just stick with these players. I mean, it will be either Shankar playing or Pant playing, and that's about it. It would be dangerous for them, I think, to have one eye on the semi-final. I think they should still basically just win the next game and then see what happens.
Yeah. Yep. So one game at a time, and who knows? Maybe England and India will meet again in the semi-final, and let's see what happens in the next week of the tournament, and maybe we can get the guests on again at some point. Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you, Kartikeya.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So that brings us to the end of another episode of the 81 All Out podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever else you prefer. It would be wonderful if we could leave a rating and a review so that more people find us. You can also follow us on Twitter at 81 All Out and check out all our previous podcasts and articles on our website, 81allout.com. In case you're still listening, here's a shout out to our sister podcast on regional movies, whereistheotherbanana.com. You can follow them on Twitter at theotherbanana and watch out for updates on all the movie reviews and discussions that they put out. As always, we would love to hear your thoughts on the work we do, so please send us your feedback. Goodbye.
In the air, Sehwag takes it! India win!
He'll come back for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series.
They're going to get back for 2. India home. Lords goes wild.